Hello, thank you for taking time out. This video is on the Nakshatra of Shravana. Shravana falls in the sign of Capricorn, and as per mythology it's ruled by Lord Vishnu. Lord Vishnu is the preserver of the universe. He supervises every activity that takes place. He's behind the laws of nature. So I'll be sharing his story in more detail shortly, and later I'll be going through how different planets behave in Shravana. Lord Vishnu is the most powerful. He's all-pervading. He has defined the process and procedure behind any activity, whether it's growing fruits and vegetables to the water cycle. He's also responsible for law and order. He makes sure that the universe keeps running peacefully in an orderly fashion. That is his prime duty, and therefore the Shravana native would also have a similar role in the society. The native might organize things on a large scale and may describe rules and regulations to be followed. The native may also be a protector of societal norms, the upholder of law. That is what Shravana is all about. Lord Vishnu resides, as per mythology, in a remote part of the universe, and that is symbolic of the eyes of supervision that Lord Vishnu is known to possess. He's supervising everything, he's seeing everything, he's making sure the cosmic law is followed, he's making sure there's peace. And so the native would also be in such a position in the society where from a position, from a distance, the native is supervising things, supervising large-scale projects. Individuals working in those multinational firms responsible for coordinating with teams centered in different parts of the world. So that coordination, that organization, that defining of rules and regulations, procedures and processes, the structures, the policies, and distribution of responsibility, allocating of resources, all of this might be part of the native's work. And this coordination and organization is seen in everyday life. When we have to go buy groceries, we make a list of the items we need to buy. The organization is Shravana linked. When we are working, there's a complicated project, we then use project management tools like Asana or Slack to streamline the process, to streamline the workflow. That is Shravana. That is the purpose of Shravana. Organization, essentially. You'd find this interesting that this Nakshatra's main symbol is an ear, which symbolizes the Shravana native's listening ability. The native would be a very calm, patient listener. So organizing things on a large scale also requires that you listen to the concerns of different parties. You understand their concerns and then plan. Then lay out a schedule for the sequence of events or the distribution of responsibility. This is an opportune time for me to highlight that this Nakshatra's planetary ruler is Moon. And therefore this Nakshatra has a maternal side, and that maternal side is expressed by the native's listening ability. This Nakshatra falls in the sign ruled by Saturn. Therefore the native can even be a counselor. Most problems in the world can be solved if the two warring parties are ready to listen. And listening carefully and patiently is what Shravana is all about. And that is a quality the native would possess. And the idea behind organizing and coordinating and listening is to maintain peace, to keep things running in an orderly manner, keep things running efficiently, properly. That is the purpose behind Shravana. Lord Vishnu is behind assigning the responsibility of the heavens to Lord Indra. He assigned the Rudras the rulership of the atmosphere and assigned the Vasus as the ruler of the earth. So this allocation of responsibility was the duty of Lord Vishnu. And that is also one of the main aspects of Shravana, where a C-level executive is assigning duties to colleagues, that the sales director would be this person, the technical side would be looked after by this person, the public relations aspect, that person. So coordination, organization, and allocation, perhaps these are the three pillars that explain Shravana. There's another interesting story of Lord Vishnu, and that is to do with Lord Vishnu in the form of Lord Vamana won back the entire universe from King Bali, who was known to have a demonic temperament. And he did so in 3 steps. That's the mythology. And he took those 3 steps quickly, rapidly. Now this is symbolic, firstly, of the native stepping in whenever there's miscarriage of justice, for example. The native can be a social worker. Please keep in view this Nakshatra's ruler is Moon. So there's this maternal side. Furthermore, these steps that Lord Vishnu had taken, he took those steps rapidly, quickly, and therefore anything to do with speed is directly linked to Shravana. High-speed vehicles are linked to Shravana. And I'll give you a great example. Enzo Ferrari, he has in his chart a strong Shravana's influence on his career. That, in my view, is the reason behind his business being in car racing. And those 3 steps that Lord Vishnu had taken are known to be one bigger than the other, or growing exponentially. And that is symbolic of the native can experience an exponential growth in one's career, for example. Or if the native feels strongly about a social cause, the native would make quick progress to restore peace, to fight injustice. The native would quickly gain ground and fight the ones who are behind that injustice. I'd earlier mentioned that Lord Vishnu lives in the remote part of the universe as per mythology, and therefore everything to do with space is directly linked to Shravana. Whether you see a future as an astronomer, an astrophysicist, an aerospace engineer, or you're involved with space travel, these industries are also directly linked to Shravana. Now, if you go back to the symbol of Shravana, and that's an ear, that not only highlights listening ability, but also, in my view, mass communication. Remember, Shravana is all about doing things on a large scale, and coordination is an important aspect of Shravana. So coordination and communication combined leads to mass communication, and by extension even the telecom sector. In one of the videos I posted on the YouTube channel, I had highlighted the presence of Shravana in the birth chart of Steve Jobs. His inventions led to mass communication. You can say his work was linked to the telecom sector. His greatest invention, the iPhone. Incidentally, I'm recording this video on an iPhone. So I am communicating with masses. So I'm highlighting Shravana's direct link to the mass communication sector, and by extension even the media sector. I'd like to share a list of other possibilities. The native can be a language teacher, a pronunciation expert, a translator, a storyteller, a journalist, a TV anchor, a talk show host, a dialogue coach, a linguist, distinguished speaker, public speaker, voice-over artist, a symphony director, a sound engineer, composers, counselors, telecom engineers, and the like. At this stage, I'd like to explain to you how Shravana is classified. Shravana firstly belongs to the nature of Chara, movable. And there's an explanation behind it. Firstly, the 3 steps Lord Vishnu took, he took those steps with great speed. And secondly, he resides in a remote part of the universe. Both of them explain why this nakshatra has a movable nature. The native might be fond of travel, fond of living in isolation, not holding oneself grounded to one place. So not only can the native on a mental plane step in if the native sees injustice, even on a physical plane, the native can be an explorer or fond of places far away from the society. And you won't be surprised that this nakshatra's caste is that of an outcast. Furthermore, this nakshatra has the Gana of Deva, which shouldn't be of any surprise. The temperament is divine, and that's linked to Lord Vishnu's character. And lastly, and counterintuitively, this nakshatra belongs to the guna of Rajasic, worldly. This nakshatra is a lot about achieving things in the world. Perhaps achievement is in restoring peace. Achievement is in upholding law and order. Achievement is in having things running properly in an orderly fashion. There are various examples I'd like to share with you. One is Swami Vivekananda. In his case, I find the career house being ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is in Shravana. Not only did he promote his ideas on spirituality, he did so internationally. And I'd mentioned Shravana is directly linked to mass communication. The other great example is Pope Francis. He has Moon and Venus in the 8th in Shravana. So I'd highlighted earlier that the native would step in immediately if the native sees someone suffering. And Moon in the 8th in Shravana highlights that. Through Pope Francis' example, I'm trying to highlight the softer, maternal, caring side of Shravana. Another example, this time from the political sphere, is Martin Luther King Jr. He has Mercury too in Shravana. Through his example, I'm trying to highlight the public speaking side of Shravana. And this position falls in his career house. You must try to go beyond this. Shravana's ruler is Moon, and Moon in his case is in Purva Bhadapada. Purva Bhadapada, which I'll be later sharing, is a nakshatra belonging to revolutionary leaders. So by studying the chart entirely, starting with studying the position of the nakshatra's ruler, you can then identify which aspect of Shravana would be visible in your chart, should you have Shravana in your chart. There are 2 other examples, and one is Oprah Winfrey. In her case too, I find Shravana a strong influence. And again, if we go through the nakshatra's planetary ruler, which is Moon, in Oprah Winfrey's case, Moon is in Anuradha. If you watch the video I've placed on Anuradha, I'd mentioned Anuradha belongs to the ones who are protecting the society. Anuradha are peacemakers. They are social workers, particularly if Moon is there. So her work, although linked to mass media, as she has Venus in Shravana, the purpose behind that program was to highlight the triumph of individuals over their sufferings. She was highlighting how people have overcome difficulty. So there was a strong social sentiment behind her program. Another example is Ellen DeGeneres. From her example, I'm trying to highlight the mass communication side. I'd earlier mentioned that the native can be a talk show host. These 2 examples highlight that aspect of Shravana. And lastly, there's an interesting example of Adolf Casares, the Argentinian writer, his statue is found in a cafe in Buenos Aires called Cafe La Bella, as he spent his time in the cafe writing and ideating with his friend. In his chart too, I found Shravana's influence, and I'm trying to highlight that this nakshatra is also linked to writers. Writing naturally is linked to mass communication. So I hope these examples made sense and it helped you understand what Shravana is all about. So if you have your rising as Shravana, firstly, I think you are someone very responsible. You don't think about things on a small scale. You understand things from a larger perspective. Like if we are recycling, we are doing it for a higher purpose, not just to make money in return or to clean our house. There's a higher purpose. The moon and Saturn's qualities would be seen in your character, so you'll naturally be maternal and caring. And overall, I believe you'd be an organized person. A lot, however, would depend on where moon and Saturn are placed, and also in which pada would your rising fall in the Navamsha, which would be the first 4 signs. So if it's the sign of Aries, the revolutionary side, which highlights you stepping in when you see injustice, would be more visible in your character. There would be more passion and drive behind your activities, and youthfulness in your character. So if it's the sign of Taurus, I think you'd be more resilient, more persistent with your effort to step in when you see something wrong, and you'd also carry an attractive personality. So if it's the sign of Gemini, the mass communication aspect of this nakshatra would be more visible in your character. You can even be a public speaker or someone who likes to express your views openly and freely. And if it's the sign of Cancer, I think the maternal side, the caring side, the listening ability, that would be visible in your character. So a planet's position in Shravana has to be closely examined by examining the position of the nakshatra and the sign ruler, which are Moon and Saturn. But studying a planet's position in Shravana is an excellent start, so let's do that. If Moon is in Shravana, I think the first thing that occurs to me is the maternal side, the caring side, the listening ability. Your patience might be one of your greatest qualities. Like you see individuals who put their arm around the one who's going through a difficult time. You make the person feel more comfortable. So human resources managers, to social workers, to even therapists can have Moon in Shravana. I think your style of conversation can also be very comforting, very warm for the listener. And I think you'll make an excellent organizer. And your organizational skills would be driven by your concern for members of your team. So if you are a project manager, for example, you'll take into account the working hours, for example, for some of your team members, or if some of your team members have skipped their holidays for the sake of the project. So you'll feel concerned about their welfare, and then you'd organize work accordingly, and you would make an excellent manager of any kind. Lord Vishnu supervises activities in the universe, and therefore you may find yourself in a similar position where you are supervising a large-scale project of some kind. You may have an interest in car racing or space travel. I'd mention the reasons behind that. The individuals can be attracted to high-speed vehicles and astronomy, anything to do with space. This nakshatra has the caste of an outcast, so in many ways your ideas and way of thinking may not conform to common beliefs. I think your ideas might be unconventional, as you may think of things looking into various aspects which others may not consider. So when you form an opinion, an informed opinion, I believe you'll take into account many parameters, and that might be the reason behind your thinking standing out. You could be driven by the materialistic pleasures of life. Remember, this nakshatra is belonging to the guna of Rajasic, but largely your intention would be to serve the society. You'd be a very service-oriented person. Here, moon is finding itself in its own nakshatra, in the environment of Saturn. That's my view of moon in Shravana. A sun Shravana-like individual, firstly, can inspire people to take on a large-scale project, to rally people around you, organize work, inspire people. This position can even lead to a career in government service. Here, Sun and Saturn are coming together. Your style of conversation can be authoritative. People would follow your word, and you'd come across as an individual who can shoulder high responsibility, like a king looking after one's kingdom. It's high responsibility. I think the native may also find oneself in a similar position, where it's a large-scale multinational project which the native now is looking after, supervising, coordinating, allocating resources, everything linked to Shravana. However, the native might suffer from ego battles. Sun and Saturn do not share a good relationship, so the native might face issues with authority figures. The native's career can be linked to the main industries I'd mentioned, linked to Shravana, like car racing or anything to do with the automotive sector, or linked to space. And not to forget, the entire mass media industry is linked to Shravana. I think the native's leadership style can be seen as unconventional. This nakshatra has the caste of an outcast, or the native can be a leader of an unconventional group, a group which is challenging injustice. Like you see individuals marching on the street, challenging the consumption of plastic and challenging the government to do something about it. So native would carry the aura to lead such charge. Altogether, I think the native would be a very responsible, reliable person who would inspire people to follow one's path. That's my view. Mercury in Shravana, firstly, in my view, leads to an excellent communicator. In fact, the native can be a public speaker, a writer, a journalist of some kind. I'd earlier shared the examples of Swami Vivekananda, who spread spirituality internationally, and Martin Luther King Jr., known for his very popular speech, I Have a Dream. He has Mercury in Shravana in his career house. So public speaking then becomes one of your greatest strengths. You can even be interested in learning different languages and can even be linked to translations and editing. Work can even be centered around engineering, sound, something on those lines, or the telecom sector, particularly looking after the business side of telecom sector, as Mercury represents businesses too, and future can even be as a counselor. Apart from this, I think you'll be excellent at organizing things on a large scale. I think you'd be excellent at multitasking. Oh, this team requires this, that supplier is contacting me for that, the clients are coming at this time, we have to be there at that time. Planning a project, scheduling sequence of events, distributing work, coordinating with team members. Tools like Asana and Slack are a prime example of Mercury in Shravana. Multitasking made easy is the prime function, I believe, of Mercury in Shravana. One of the downsides I see is fickle-mindedness. The native would have so many ideas, that the native may find it difficult to make up one's mind. You must even view this nakshatra belongs to the nature of Chara, movable. So the native would excel in projects that require continuous generation of ideas, like advertising. And the native's thinking and ideas are going to be unconventional. The native would also be driven by worldly desires, particularly in the business sector. So if Mercury is in Shravana, perhaps you want to monetize your skills, you'd be very business inclined. So altogether, I find this position to be strong. A Venus Shravana-like individual, firstly, in my view, would be able to communicate very beautifully, very lovingly. I've given you the example of Oprah Winfrey. She has Venus in Shravana. Secondly, Venus signifies all things creative. Therefore, the native can even find a future in advertising or in the media sector. Venus signifies money, and Shravana is directly linked to organizing projects. So the native can make an excellent risk manager, where you organize the project to minimize risk. We must not forget this nakshatra falls in the environment of Saturn, and the native would be an excellent relationship builder, particularly if relations are required to be built with people from different backgrounds. The native would have the natural empathy, the natural concern. So a human resource manager can have Venus in Shravana. An HR manager is required to look after the concerns of people who come from a different background. A Venus Shravana-like person would make an excellent coordinator, manager of people. Venus signifies our desires on a material plane, and Shravana, as I mentioned, belongs to the guna of Rajasic. Therefore, the native can be driven by things of the outside world, name, fame, money, etc. Venus also is classified as belonging to the caste of a Brahmin, and therefore the native can even play the role of an educator in the lives of others. Through one's message, the native might promote the idea of peace, of friendship, of love, in a way where the listener feels guided. The native oneself would be an excellent listener. These are the qualities I see you possessing. Venus shares an excellent relationship with Saturn, which is the sign ruler, and an okay relationship with Moon. I think Venus and Moon find a common ground in this nakshatra. So altogether, I find this position to be a strong one. A Mars Shravana-like person would be excellent, firstly, at organizing a large-scale project. The native would have a planner, an organizer, a scheduler, to make sure all aspects of the project are running efficiently, properly, in an orderly fashion. So you can rely on a Mars Shravana-like person to make sure the project is on track and is going to finish on time. I mentioned a Shravana native can step in whenever the native sees injustice, and therefore I'd linked Shravana to law and order. I find Mars Shravana-like individual having a background in law, like those petitions for public welfare filed by lawyers that this is wrong in the society and we have to do something about it. Public interest litigators, I believe, can have Mars in Shravana. Shravana is all about supervising the society. Therefore, I believe the natives' ambitions are also going to be on a large scale, rather than solving issues on a small scale like a theft or a divorce. The native might be more inclined towards fighting the injustice we are doing to the environment, and therefore might be fighting with environmentalists. The native's style of conversation can be very direct, pinpointed, straightforward, and this is one of the positions where the native may not be a very patient listener, unlike the character of Shravana. as Mars is all about action. So the native would want to get to the point quickly, like a barrister in a courtroom. There's no point talking about philosophies. Mars would want facts, figures. Mars is excellent at building things, and therefore together the native can have a future in the automotive sector, particularly, for example, designing an engine used in a high-speed vehicle, or aerospace engineering, or something similar. Here Mars and Saturn are coming together, and therefore the native would be very resilient and technically very sound. And the native would go by the book, go by the rules and regulations assigned to the native. The native would be a stickler to process, procedure. The native would make sure order is maintained. So much so, I think, a Mars Shravana like native can even be a leader in peacekeeping forces. Please keep in view, I'm using the word peacekeeping. And that is the function of Moon. That is also the function of Saturn. One of the downsides I see is the native wanting to do things all by oneself. The approach the native might have would also be that of an outcast, and the native would be very driven by material success, as this Nakshatra-based Guna is Rajasic. The native would be very restless and would be very eager to achieve one's goals and accomplish one's mission. And the native might also emotionally torment oneself. The native may take on such a big project that the native may feel the burden of that big project at an emotional level. Despite all of this, I find Mars Shravana to be a strong position. I think the native can be an inspiration to people around oneself. That's my view. A Jupiter Shravana like native can be a lawmaker or a policy maker. The native would be responsible for looking after the society. The native could define rules and regulations and can formulate processes and procedures to be followed. And secondly, the native could be a mass communicator, a motivator, an educator who motivates people to come together for a cause, to step in when they see something wrong, like anti-corruption crusades. A politician says if you see someone involved in corruption, you must raise your voice. You must try to get rid of corruption which is plaguing the society. Such ideas, these big ideas, are linked to Jupiter Shravana, and therefore the native can have a future in philosophy, even judiciary. I mentioned Shravana is directly linked to maintaining law and order. The native would not only be known for one's philosophical perspective on things, the native would also be known for one's optimism. So the native might rally people around oneself that no, this is something which is wrong, I know we can solve this issue. So remaining positive, even if the challenge is very large or appears insurmountable, a Jupiter Shravana like person would carry that aura, no, we can do it. The native could be fond of travel. The native can even be well educated on various languages or different cultures, and can have an interest in everything to do with space or the automotive sector, particularly high-speed vehicles. And I think the native would be a very mature, responsible, reliable person. It's a coming together of Jupiter, Moon and Saturn. So there's a maternal side linked to Shravana, which is now combined with Saturn's resilience and Jupiter's philosophical perspective, making this position a very formidable position in my view. A Saturn Shravana-like person, firstly, in my view, would make an excellent organizer. An organizer of a large-scale project requiring coordinating with a large team and distributing work to those team members and allocating resources accordingly. And the native could be relied upon to accomplish the purpose behind the project. I would go on to say the organizational skills that the native would possess would be beyond compare. Secondly, the native would have a natural concern for the society of people around oneself. Here we are combining Saturn and Moon, so the native would be very service-oriented, very keen to look after the social welfare of people around oneself. The native would be known for one's resilience. The native would work patiently to finish a project, would be willing to patiently listen to one's team members, to one's life partner, to one's family members. And the native would possess this inherent empathy. Other than this, I think the native would also be a follower of tradition. The native can also be attracted to ancient healing methods of some kind. One of the things that might make the native an outcast would be the native's desire to do everything properly and efficiently. The native can be a perfection seeker, and in the process the native might take much longer to finish a task than necessary. Other than this, I think the position is very strong. A Rahu Shravana-like person can combine technology with mass communication. Like what I'm doing currently, it's a very Rahu Shravana-like activity. So any platform which allows a person to spread one's message is Rahu Shravana-like. I'm referring to a platform based on technology like YouTube. The native's views and ideas would be very unconventional. The native may be fond of learning a foreign language and may also be very keen to learn about different cultures. Although the native would be a good organizer, the native, however, might be known for smart methods to reduce time. Patience may not be the native's greatest virtue, so the native would always have ideas on how certain things can be made more efficient, how certain steps can be avoided. So the native's organizational skills would lie in reducing time, improving efficiency, even if it requires letting go of certain rules and regulations. The native could be known to bypass a few steps, unlike a Saturn Shravana-like person who will make sure every rule is followed. The native would be driven by the materialistic pleasures of life, and in the process the native might delude oneself into thinking that by achieving this the native would be happy, or by achieving these many followers on Instagram or having these many viewers on YouTube, this can lead to happiness or success. The native can delude oneself with such imaginings. A Rahu Shravana-like person can also have a future in the telecom industry. Despite the materialistic side linked to this position, a Rahu Shravana-like native can find innovative solutions to complicated problems in a large-scale project. Sometimes you need a unique idea. Sometimes you need an unconventional thinker to fix things, even if that requires not going by the book. And that is what this position is all about. A Ketu Shravana-like person, firstly, in my view, would have this desire to be by oneself. The person may have an isolationist policy. Both Ketu is known for that, and Shravana, as I'd mentioned, belongs to the caste of an outcast. The native would make an excellent strategic planner. The organizational skills not only would be driven by the native's skills, but also the native's intuition, that by doing this first and doing this later, we might save time. So the native would be known for one's piercing logic, The major downside to this position is the native would ignore rules and regulations, may even bypass law. So this disregard for procedure can be one of the main concerns for the native. And that is something I also see if Rahu is in Shravana. I think when Rahu is in Shravana, the native would look to bypass the steps. When Ketu is there, the native may ignore the rules altogether. I think the native would intuitively understand the concerns of people. The major downside to this position is going to the extreme. Even if it's providing help, the native may go to the extreme, disregarding the process, the rules, the regulations, and even the law. So proper guidance would be necessary. Think a Ketu Shravana-like individual could have been a social worker in one's past life. Thank you for watching this video till the very end. If you have any questions, please post your questions in the comments section. And if you'd like to stay in touch, please subscribe to this channel. Thanks again for watching. Bye for now.